Okay, hi everyone. This is Lai again. I am the data scientist for Measurement Lab, and in this module, I wanted to talk more specifically about how NDT and MLab could be useful during a disruption event to collect data around its occurrence. So, in general, our data can be quite useful in any data set that spans across time to measure a disruption event because by definition, a disruption is something that is sort of diverging from the norm of how usually operates. And so if you have data, of sort of before and after of that period, you can perhaps see differences in the time period that you're interested in and say, this could point to something being different, being intentionally different about the network during this time. There's a lot of different ways to think about disruption. For example, it could mean a full shutdown, meaning that the internet is just off, there is no connectivity possible. You can also think about it as a throttling event, so a purposefully slowing down of the network such that content you can access, but it just takes so long and you either give up or the browser times out. And so there are these different sort of gradients of disruption. And what we're going to look at today is different ways to think about that in terms of analyzing NDT, and then also trying to collect more NDT data to, sort of back up what you're hearing about anecdotally on the ground. So let's look at this example. This is the NDT test per day in Kazakhstan from January 1st to January 10th. And apologies, that doesn't say it, but it is 2022. This was a period of unrest in Kazakhstan. So what this graph is showing is it's showing of NDT tests that were taken that day. It is not saying anything about performance. It's just saying how many tests were taken. And so we can see obviously there is a dip on January 6th, and that might suggest that on that day there was a taking away of connectivity such that people were not able to run tests as they normally do. I want to be very clear, this does not definitively prove anything. This is just one data source. This is just one way to get at the question. However, it certainly is a stark contrast from what you can tell are the tests before and after. And so it's a data point to add. So when you're hearing from people that there was an internet shutdown on the ground, you can then think, let's see if there's evidence of this in the NDT MLab data set that points to less people being able to test their internet connection. And I will say it is actually quite rare in many regions to have just 0 tests per day. So within the context of the data set itself, it's interesting information. Again, not definitive, but very interesting and points to a signal. So that's, basically what I just said is this first bullet point of, NDT alone cannot verify an intentional disruption event, right? That could have been a network outage. We don't know why that test count drop happened, but so it can't necessarily say anything about intention. But documenting these types of changes can help corroborate other reports. So if other data sets or other journalists reporting is telling us that there could be intention, this helps back it up. And a graph I'm not showing is, you could also look at the change performance, and these could reflect throttling. So you could use those queries that we went over before to take a look at how the performance is decreasing across time, across a political event. And NDT would be able to reflect a change in performance. Now, again, I just want to be very clear that this does not necessarily suggest intention, and it does not tell you why, but it is evidence that it's happening. So another way to think about this, everything we've talked about so far has been looking at the data just sort of as it comes in through people testing on their own. But you could also take the approach of proactively collecting measurements from your community. So you could think about having a group of volunteers take measurements at some regular interval, and or when they start feeling like they're experiencing a disruption. You could use, any of the clients that we talked about before. So, for example, you could use the Chrome extension. You could also just have them run it through the Google search integration. However, the benefit of doing something like the Chrome extension is that you'll have more ways to identify the specific clients, which then can tell you more about the device types that they were running and such. But however, if just bare bones could be just to encourage people to take the test by whatever means is easiest, which might be the Google search integration. And so it's the goal there being just collecting more data. And like I mentioned, you can use the Chrome extension and things like it to just be more intentional about how you're collecting it. One thing that I do want to note is that we do publish the IP address. This is not easy or in our experience possible to link back to the user, but it is considered PII in some jurisdictions. We are in active works to not collect it. Currently, it is the distinguishing feature of the test, so it allows us to differentiate between clients more easily and more specifically. However, we understand the privacy concerns here, and so this is something that we are working on to not have to collect. However, currently we do. So this is something that you should consider when and make clear to your users or to whoever you're having run tests that we do collect and publish the IP address. So with these two sort of things to keep in mind in terms of NDT alone cannot verify an intentional disruption event, as well as the fact that we collect and publish the IP address, there is a lot of potential here for you to collect evidence about what you are hearing or experiencing on the ground. And I think the sort of key takeaway here is that you don't necessarily just have to depend on the data that's there and people taking tests at will. You can proactively organize around collecting this data and collecting more information about the people that are running this, such that you can be able to say more specifically, these aren't just 200 random tests, these are 200 volunteers who have given us their device information, and we know that they're coming from these types of browsers, we know that they're coming from these types of operating systems, and be able to talk a little bit more specifically, which can become very useful when trying to sort of supporting your evidence, because that gives sort of detractors less to stand on if you are able to talk more articulately about the data that you're collecting. So this is just a kind of overview of the potential here. I'd be very interested to hear from anyone who tries to do something like this or has already. But in summary, NDT can be useful to measure a disruption event and to collect evidence of its existence, of its occurrence. And there are just some things to keep in mind if you choose to do so. Feel free to reach out with any questions.